I'm not talking about, sterilizing people. I'm just saying, like, what does your ideal world look like? Like, how many people are in it?
More and more people, more and more flourishing. Every year that goes by, the population increases, but what increases at a more rapid rate is the carrying capacity of planet Earth for people. There will always be reasons to say there are problems now, those problems are terrible, they're being caused by people. People are the cause of problems. We should reduce the number of people, then we'll reduce the number of problems. But what I hear is reduce the number of people, reduce the number of solutions or potential ways of arriving at solutions. And so we have to begin thinking of people, as I said, and this is stolen from the libertarians who say, 2 hands, 1 mouth. We should really say trillions of neurons, 1 mouth, because we are constantly coming up with creative solutions to problems. And we want everyone, even in the worst places in the world, they really do want to solve their problems. They really do want to make their circumstance better. But they are mired in bad ideas and bad ideology. And they are victims as much as they are perpetrators.
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
It's moving us in a good direction.
All right, so let's explore. We have some substantive disagreements. Let's explore those. Which one do we have? Many.
Well, I was surprised to hear that you think there should be a maximum number of people on planet Earth. I've often argued that we're very much at the beginning. We need a heck of a lot more. Do you want me to put my case as to...
Yeah, I can't fathom. Like, why? Is it economic in base? Can I guess what it is, what your reasoning? Is it economic?
Well, that would be one thing. We want more wealth. We certainly want more wealth.
Okay, make your argument, because I don't get it.
Okay. We exist in a circumstance where the problems that are coming at us, we cannot possibly predict. We don't know what's going to turn up tomorrow. Some lazy Tuesday afternoon, the asteroid could come streaking across the sky
100%.
and wipe most of us out. The next virus that comes could be much worse than the last one.
100%.
We can enumerate the problems ad nauseum. So what we need to solve problems is creativity. We need to be able to correct the errors and ever faster. Now, if we want more creativity, there's a few ways of doing that. One would be AGI. Okay,
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, that would be a perfect way of doing it. One would be eliminating anti-rational memes from the culture. So have people think more clearly, have people think more critically and creatively. So the existing population could just become better at solving problems and more creative.
Pause on that. So so have fewer anti-rational memes, and to do that, you have to make sure that the means of error correction are embedded in our institutions. Like, everyone can criticize, we can challenge, we can question. There are no topics off the table. We don't have that.
No.
In fact, we've spent the last 10 years disabling the mechanisms for free speech that we actually did have, and now I would argue we're actually worse off. But okay, so one way to do that is to keep the method of error correction, like as Reid says, do not block the road of inquiry.
Right. Yes, and it might be even deeper than that. I mean, the last 10 years has certainly been an aberration. It's been terrible. But before that, all traditional methods of education, especially schooling, has been about indoctrinating people. Learning isn't fun. People leave school not enjoying mathematics because they're beaten over the head with it while they're at school, punished for the errors. And so they learn that learning itself isn't necessarily a fun thing to do. Learning is what you do in school. Learning is that kind of thing where you do it in order to get a credential, you do it in order to pass a test, whatever it happens to be, so you can get a job. But learning should be fun. That anti-rational meme that we all walk around with, that it's uncomfortable when you're encountering new knowledge for the first time, that needs to be eviscerated as well.
So let's say I give it to you and say, okay, it's a slow asymptote. Like, the road to free inquiry and not blocking the means of error correction, that's going to take a long time. Okay, so you're saying we need more people, we have more creativity if we have it's not just better educated populace, but we need structures in society. Like, we need preconditions that allow people to flourish as thinkers and creatively, and we don't have those.
Yes, I was throwing you a bone. I'm saying that what we need, and no doubt you agree with this, we need creativity in order to solve our problems.
100%.
So one way of doing that would be AGI. There we go, we've solved that problem. But we don't have AGI yet. One way would be to eliminate the anti-rational memes, or at least reduce the number of anti-rational memes.
We can't even do that in secular societies. We have too many. The anti-rational memes. We can't do. We can't do that with our institutions. We can't. The whole trans thing. We just can't do it. It's not possible.
Well, there's no physical law that says it's not possible. So it is possible. We don't know how yet to eliminate many of these things, although I have some ideas.
I mean, Islamism would be a great example of that.
Yep. But if our circumstance is that we need more creativity, we need entities that can be more creative. And so one way of doing that is to increase the population. If we have more, like Elon Musk talks about having more babies, I don't think that it's the only way. I think it is a way. And I would say that I'm against people who are for, the modern term is degrowth. The whole idea that we need to reduce the amount of energy we're using, we're already too wealthy, people are like a virus. It's quite the opposite.
I don't agree with that.
The world is hostile. The world is filled with pollution already. People think of, the natural environment as being this idyllic place where if we were living in tribal societies, we'd have a healthy life. No, you'd be dead before you reach the age of 40. Most women would, die in childbirth at some point or other after having been raped. This is what this idyllic tribal society is like. We live in a modern society now, and so when we have children, those children tend to be raised, putting as a caveat all I said about the anti-rational memes and our relationship with learning as not necessarily being fun. Nonetheless, if we have more and more people in the West brought up in an Enlightenment tradition, we will have more creativity. We'll be able to solve our problems. We may very well have, 25 more Elon Musks before the end of the century. And that way we'll be able to accelerate our way to, not necessarily to Mars, I don't think that's necessarily a solution, but to a planet Earth which isn't able to sustain 10 billion people, but 100 billion people or more. We can build vertically. People who've talked in the past about how too many people is going to lead to death and destruction began with like Thomas Malthus in the 1700s, who was saying by 1900... because
all those Malthusian claims have been proven wrong.
Yeah, and so we can always support more people. I agree with Steven Pinker. I don't think you need 1,000 graphs to prove the point, but things have objectively gotten better over the millennia and are accelerating in their rate of getting better. So more people are what, in part, make the world a better place.
Okay, so the Malthus idea is that you have the rate of technology expands more quickly than population, so we didn't see large-scale famine. In fact, we live in a time of abundance and obesity, morbid obesity, and I just want to make sure that it's clear for me as I repeat this back to you. So your claim is more people, more creativity, more ability to solve problems.
Yes.
Okay, I find that interesting, but in no way compelling, nor do I think that it answers my objections. Okay. So let's just accept by fiat every single thing you said was true, and we'll put it on a scale here. Now I'm going to give you my scale, and you tell me which weighs more heavily. Yeah?
Yeah, but I don't like the idea of weighing things. I think there's going to be a good explanation, and we're going to rule out one of them as being false.
Okay,
we'll see.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that approach as well. So the first problem you have is, well, let me ask you a question. We just talked about the Israeli Palestinian situation. Would that be easier or harder to solve if there were more people or fewer people? Like, let's say 10 people lived in the whole region.
All else being equal, more people in the future will be a better thing for that problem as well, because those people will be raised in a better, more enlightened society. As time goes on,
that cannot possibly be true. You could have said that 50 years ago, and look at Gaza now. Look at the Palestinians now.
Mm. There will always problems are inevitable. More people is not going to lead to an unproblematic state.
No, but that claim you just made seems demonstrably false. I mean, it's just empirically and historically false. The idea that we're kind of marching toward these better societies. I mean, not Pinker's idea, better angels, but the idea that the societies will become more enlightened and more rational. I mean, the Islamic world, that's not happened.
It's not inevitable, but I would say that Islam can, I'm optimistic, in the same way that Nazi Germany was roundly defeated and the ideology largely expunged from that part of the world, and we do have something approaching a more enlightened society in Europe now. The place isn't being ruled by Hitler. In the same way that Japan after the Second World War, that ideology was also destroyed. It can happen within Islam. It hasn't happened yet.
All right, I'll give it to you. Let's just accept by fiat that it can happen. Would the Israeli-Palestinian situation be harder or easier to solve if there were 10 people living in Israel and 10 people living in, I don't know, what the language is problematic, Palestine, however you want to call it, occupied territory, whatever you want to say. Or if there were 1 billion people, of course that's probably not, or 500 million people, or what have you, living in one and the other. I mean,
it depends. Well, of course, what you're saying is keeping everything as it is now. Like, obviously, if you've got 500 million Islamist jihadis living in Palestine, it's a non-starter. However, I can imagine all sorts of things, but I can certainly imagine a situation where the people of Palestine within the next few decades have learned better, have become a more moderate version of what they are now. They're only that way because they have been indoctrinated since mother's knee about why we should kill all the Jews. So that's what I would refer to as an edge case, however, for the broader point of we need more people. Okay, well, in that particular place, we don't need more jihadis. That's not my argument.
Okay, well, I mean, it may be an edge case, but it's a conflict that's tainting and poisoning the whole world. But you can go around the world and ask yourself, Cyprus, I mean, you can ask yourself that of any situation. Geopolitical problems are more difficult to solve. If there's one person living in Taiwan, it wouldn't be that big of a geopolitical issue. You could literally go around the world and apply that principle to anything. Fewer people equals, I mean, I would argue it's a direct line of causation. It's just easier to solve problems. More people, more difficult.
No.
Okay.
Not. You said solve problems. So is it easy to solve scientific problems with
fewer
people?
So
geopolitical,
yeah,
right?
that's
so you're focused very narrowly on this one particular kind of problem.
Well, just as you gave me 4 or 5, I'm going to give you 4 or 5 of my arguments. This is just the first one.
Yes, okay.
Okay. So fewer people, easier to solve geopolitical problems. Second thing, environmental concerns. So you've seen these massive garbage patches in the ocean. They're the size of, Long Island. They're just floating out there. People are trying to clean. More people, more resource uses. I think it's 100 gallons of water per cotton T-shirt.
Can I deal with these arguments one at a time?
Please, by all means.
So a resource is only a resource once we have the knowledge about how to turn otherwise useless matter into a resource. In principle, we could turn anything into a resource. Now,
wow, you are an optimist. Okay.
Well, that simply is the definition of what a resource is. So resources are unlimited, literally unlimited. What's limited is knowledge. We have to figure out how to take the useless matter that's scattered throughout the entire universe and turn it into something useful. Now, in principle, the laws of physics tell us that the universe, filled with hydrogen as it is, I mean, it's low density, but there's a lot of hydrogen out there in between stars and in between galaxies. In principle, that could be gathered up, transmuted into literally any substance that you can think of. Now, that is beyond our present capability of doing so. However, on planet Earth, we have a whole bunch of resources that are at the moment unexploited. Now, those resources could be used if you're concerned. I'm not particularly concerned about the oceans. Everywhere I go and have a look at oceans, they look pristine, they look beautiful. Apparently there are these garbage patches, and if it's true it's as big as Long Island, that's nothing. That's a speck on the entirety of the Pacific Ocean, for example. That can be cleaned up.
Multiple, but anyway, okay. So
that can be cleaned up. So I don't see the argument from pollution as at all standing against the point that I'm making. And in fact, if you want to solve that problem, more people would help, because some child yet to be born might be the one who is the genius to come up with the idea about how to purify the oceans.
And all the children who will be born will continue to tap resources. So
2 hands, 1 mouth, as people like to say. We produce twice as much as what we consume, at least.
Oh, okay. So the idea that everything is a potential resource, I guess that sounds good, but that doesn't, I'm thinking about nuclear waste. Maybe it's a resource 10,000 years from now, when at that point we'll figure out how to deal with it. But we still have the problem of garbage patches. We still have the problem of carbon.
I don't have the problem of a garbage patch. Do you have you're told about these problems, but are they affecting you or anyone you know, or anything you know? In fact, you're just being told this by some documentary or something. There's a garbage patch. What actual effect is it having on civilization? The planet exists for people. I don't care. I know this sounds very, very harsh and sounds awful, but I honestly don't care about fish If the fish start to run out and people start to starve, then I'll be concerned about the fish.
Well, tuna prices are astronomically high. I mean,
Okay, yeah.
we're overfishing.
Go into why that
we're
is.
overfishing. Well, yeah, because there were too many people. If there were like 5 people on the coast of Thailand and Japan had 25 people, there wouldn't be a tragedy of the commons. Everybody would be. We would be.
You wouldn't have any technology either. You wouldn't have a means of. Probably would one of those 5 people know how to fish? They'd be struggling to eke out an existence. Thank God we have this huge civilization where people can specialise and you can rely upon the many, many other people that have the skills that you lack in order to give you the food that you need.
So how many people, and don't have a heart attack here when I tell you my answer because it will create an international incident and I like you, but how many people do you think is, like, if you could wave a magic wand, how many people would you think be good for the planet?
I wouldn't. What I would, again, that way of framing things is so far outside of my worldview. Good for the planet? There's no such thing as good for the planet. It's good for civilization,
okay,
good for people.
How many people, like, what is an ideal number? Let me rephrase that. What is an ideal number of people for you? How many people should?
That is a question asking for an authoritarian, totalitarian answer. Okay. For me to prescribe a particular number, what I'm saying is there should be no upper bound and no one should set up. As soon as you start setting an upper bound, it's very much like, well, what do you do when you start approaching that? Like,
I'm not talking about making laws against it. I'm not talking about, sterilizing people. I'm just saying, like, what does your ideal world look like? Like, how many people are in it?
More and more people, more and more flourishing. Every year that goes by, the population increases, but what increases at a more rapid rate is the carrying capacity of planet Earth for people. And the carrying capacity...
Malthus again, yeah.
Malthus, yeah. And we're not like fish. Okay, in a lake, yes, you have a carrying capacity because there's only a certain amount of oxygen in the lake and there's only a certain amount of resources and nutrients in the lake for the fish to survive. And so you will get to a point where the population of fish in that lake is going to be detrimental to the population of fish.
Right.
We are not like that. There will be, and I'm sure the scientists could possibly tell us, given the amount of resources that we have right now, there will be a certain maximum number of people that planet Earth today, on this date, in 2025, could support. But next year, it will be more than that. And the year after that will be more than that, and more because of technology, because of the way in which farming works, our ability to purify water, how many people can be stacked vertically as we begin to live more, in apartment buildings and so on and so forth. So all of that comes together to create a picture of the future where not only is the population increasing at an exponential rate, hopefully, although there seems to be signs that it's actually declining at the moment, but our capacity to support people, not merely to survive, but thrive and be wealthy, and we can all begin to live in the same... We will all... The poorest amongst us will have the wealth of Elon Musk, and the richest amongst us will, routinely be travelling to Mars backwards and forwards, something like that, And there is no physical law that prevents this. The only thing that slows us down is pessimism on the one hand about the potential of people to solve their problems and our capacity to generate knowledge and technology to support this increased number of people.
Okay, if you think this criticism is off base, please, I'm sure you'll let me know. So more people is more creativity, but let's say that our current creativity is X, and if we add twice as many people, I'm assuming you're going to say that it's more than 2X, but let's just keep it at that. There's an increased group. Why can't we use the tools of science, supercomputers, et cetera, with the existing population capacity that we have now, or with the existing population that we have now, and yield the same advantages? Why do we need more people?
That's not a criticism. That is well in accord with my fundamental premise, which is we need more creativity. I'm not saying that we necessarily need to increase the population by 10x or something like that. I'm saying that is one mechanism whereby that could happen. But the other two, as I already said, were, well, you can have AGI, that could do some of the creativity for, which, by the way, AGI is a person, would be a person. My conception of AGI is something that can explain in the same way that people can. It's a universal explainer of a kind. So if you have AGI, you have more people. You just don't have human beings, you have a silicon brain, but otherwise the consciousness, the creativity, the capacity to problem solve. So that's one. Also, as I said, and this follows on from what you just said about the supercomputers and, increasing the capacity of the existing population to solve problems. Yes, so most important of those are means of thinking, This is what you do. Helping people to think more critically, helping people to think more creatively, more rationally, more reasonably. That would also be a way of solving our problems more rapidly and avoiding the most serious consequences of the problems that we know we already have. Problems with, for example, genocidal ideologies that exist around the world, or the viruses, and we want to prevent the next virus from taking off, or whatever it happens to be. All of those things, all of those problems can be solved by any one of these prongs. What I'm saying is a criticism of your claim that there should be this particular upper bound. And all I'm saying is there is no reason for that upper bound, precisely because the upper bound itself presents us with a problem. If you say it's 500 million people, I'll say to you, why not 499? Why not 501? Why that particular number, and how have you come to that number?
Okay, so I think it's at an impasse. I understand your argument. I don't agree with it, but it is definitely giving me pause. My two strongest arguments are for why we're overpopulated are the difficulty in solving geopolitical problems, and that worsens because people have, I don't know, nuclear weapons or small numbers of people. I think it was Tom Friedman said the problem with the Israeli Palestinian problem is that anyone with a hand grenade gets a veto.
But don't you think the geopolitical problems were worse in the past? Like at the time of Genghis Khan, the geopolitical problems were pretty severe, and the population was much, much fewer. And the damage that he caused was worse than any nuclear bomb caused. It would wipe out sort of 20% of humanity or something like that. So why do an increased number of people cause more problems? Whereas in the past, when we had fewer people, there were genocides going on all the time. The state of the world in World War I was a lot worse.
There are more genocides by far per percentage of the population than there are now, happening now, by far, by orders of magnitude. I don't think it's a question of necessity. In other words, I don't think that, in fact, it's not a question of necessity because that's just an empirical question. More people we've known empirically don't lead to more genocides. But I do think it makes when a land or a place is then populated by people, I mean, if you look at, I don't know anything about the geography or the demography of Inner Mongolia, but if you went back far enough and people wanted to claim that land, then there was no one there was no problem. But the moment you start putting people, or again, we were just in Taiwan. I'm thinking of in Taiwan, when the Japanese colonized Taiwan, it's a very interesting story. My son gave me, they colonized because they liked the smell evidently of this tree, and he gave me, you undo this cork and you smell it, it's the tree. But fewer people, it was just an aside, but fewer people to solve a problem make the problem easier to solve. Now, yeah, you'll get the Genghis Khans, you'll get the unbridled individuals, the dictators who will rise up. But you now have a problem. There are so many people everywhere. It's almost like, what are you going to do about it?
The other thing I'll push back on is you seem to be using the word problem in a pejorative sense. Geopolitical problem. This is a negative thing. Can we not think of geopolitical problems as like a mathematical problem, like a problem within science? These things are fun to solve. There will always be friction between different communities of people who have somewhat different cultures. Now, so long as the geopolitical problem doesn't escalate to war, violence, genocide, that kind of thing, then diplomacy can solve these things.
That assumes there are rational actors.
Yes, and I would presume that as time goes on and we become more enlightened, we become more rational, and so we should expect not necessarily that things are going to always end up peacefully, but we should expect more peace in the future than what we saw in the past.
So what makes you think, and when you say we, I mean, there's so many people hating on the West right now, what makes you think that we're going to become more rational as time goes on? Because isn't that a presupposition of your whole argument?
Yes, because I look at a couple of things. One is an understanding of what people are, firstly, as problem solvers. It doesn't, even if you come from a tribal society right now, an extant tribal society, or your mind has been plagued by some awful ideology like Islamism, let's say, people do nonetheless escape from those ideologies. They manage to be reasoned out of them. This is one of the great fallacies.
Apostasy, that's what apostasy is, yeah.
Precisely. And so I look at both the historic trends of what people have tended to gravitate towards, things we've both just agreed that things have gotten better since Mongol times through the First World War through to today. And so there appears to be this arrow, and this arrow of time, in one sense, is directed by knowledge creation. The more knowledge that is created as time goes on includes moral knowledge as well, not merely scientific. In fact, the moral knowledge is a precondition for improving our scientific and technological knowledge, because we have to know what things to value in order to improve our technology, in order to improve our scientific explanations of the world. We need to value logic, we need to value evidence. So beneath all scientific and technological improvement are in fact a whole bunch of moral claims. And
I think that's right, yeah.
And so I am optimistic that people are attracted to iPhones, Tesla cars, what Elon Musk is doing. Even people in places that are not of the West at the moment, they're jealous. The most reasonable amongst them won't fight violently against the West. They'll want to migrate into the West, and they'll want to be assimilated into the West. Yes, there are absolutely problems. We began our conversations today with discussing some of the worst of those problems. But one would hope, and you might know the statistics on this better than I do, one would hope that the percentage of people that are brought into the West that do not assimilate, although that number is always too large, we should hope that number is zero, it is less, or it is fewer than the number that do tend to assimilate, or at least take on a whole bunch of values of the Enlightenment and of the West that they wouldn't have if they hadn't have moved countries.
All right, so you've given me things to pause about. I remember when I was in grad school, I went to Fordham in the Bronx, and I was constantly surrounded by people. It's like you ever watch the old Star Trek?
Yes.
Oh, God, thank God. Do you remember the episode when they're on the ship? And I can't remember the name of the episode, shame on me, but they're on the ship and it's crowded and they hear banging on the outside of the ship, and there's Kirk and the woman in the ship, and they like fall in love and kiss, and he had to give her a virus, and she takes the virus and it kills all her people. Find the name of that.
I might remember it. Yeah.
Find the name, it's very important. But I remember this field that I used to walk across. It was the only time, a football field or a soccer field or something, it was the only time where I was not completely surrounded by people. And I always was so resentful if more than a few people were on the field, because I didn't get that. And I just had that, and I'm not I do jiu-jitsu, I'm not claustrophobic at all. But I do feel that there is something important about nature. There is something important about preservation of natural spaces, natural wetlands. That's what my dad did. He wanted to preserve wetlands, swamps, etc. I do think that there's this idea that we need to just, terraform or build houses everywhere, put people everywhere. We need more, we're going to need power sources for that. We'll need nuclear, which will create waste. I don't know, we're facing so many problems. And the idea that there's a kind of unbridled optimism at the root of it all, because we'll all be more rational agents and our institutions will be... I don't trust the institutions for fuck's sake, zero at this point.
You are so well-travelled that it surprises me that you think the world is overpopulated. I'll get to what you think the number should be soon, but haven't you noticed, flying here from Australia, you do not even see the people when you look down below the plane. The overwhelming majority, 99.9% of Australia is uninhabited. Okay, so most of it's desert, useless.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
if we could use technology, we could irrigate that, such as they do in Israel. But even in the United States, you fly over the top, as I did going from west coast to east coast. There are vast swaths of land where there's just nothing there.
Yeah, well,
and as
why
for
do we
Europe
why do we want to put people there? That seems crazy.
Because people are wonderful. Trees are completely useless for the most part. They give us a little bit of oxygen, but...
They're carbon sinks.
Yeah, that's true.
Carbon sinks, yeah.
I'm being facetious. But the most magnificent thing in all of existence, in all of reality, is a person. I appreciate nature as well. I don't want to destroy, just because I want more people, I want civilization to flourish. That doesn't mean I don't enjoy walking through the Australian bush and spotting a kangaroo now and again. It's marvellous. I also find a wonderfully meditative state when I go down by a beach and it's a beautiful uninhabited beach. As you get in Australia, you can go there and you can be the only person on the beach for kilometres in either direction. You can exist in many places in beautiful solitude. Now, you don't get that sense in Los Angeles or New York or London or Sydney. But they are the exception to the rule.
But why would you want to put 10 times more people in Australia?
You'll still not notice, even if you did do that. I mean, in the future, we don't have the resources now or the wealth right now to do that. What I'm saying is that in the future, 10, 100 years, I would hope that our population is increased so that we can have more fun, more learning, more knowledge creation, a more rapid expansion of our capacity to prevent problems which might wipe us out. Because it will happen one day. It is inevitable that some cosmic event that would otherwise wipe out all life on Earth is going to happen, but will only be stopped if the people here have the wealth and the power and the knowledge of how to stop that thing. Because the asteroid is heading towards us. The only reason the dinosaurs got wiped out by the last huge asteroid that hit us 62 million years ago was the fact that they were too stupid to do anything about it. They didn't know the first thing about explanations or science or anything else. We do. If we want to be the one exception to every species that has ever gone extinct on the face of this planet, which is 99.9% of the species, then we need to use this capacity to solve problems. And more of us will help us solve problems faster because, as I say, we just don't know what's around the corner.
And you don't. It seems to me that there's a built-in telos to your argument that you couldn't possibly know. There's a built-in end that you see this inevitable march toward rationality
Not inevitable.
And reason and science.
We could be wiped out tomorrow. We could go wrong. Any number of things could befall us, and that's what I'm worried about. And so it's not that more people don't bring more problems. They do, but they bring better problems. They solve worse problems, and every time you solve a problem, what is revealed to you is a new vista of ever better problems because you can stand on top of the solution and you can see further. Just as Einstein stood on the shoulders of Newton, he then created general relativity and he was able to figure out he didn't figure out the GPS system, but people who came after him used his theory to see the GPS system. Now, how to develop a GPS system by using general relativity is a problem, but it's a good problem to have. And so too with understanding the laws of aerodynamics. It enables you to figure out the problem of how to make more comfortable, safer flight and all that kind of stuff. But all of this technology, everything that we experience in modern civilization comes to us because of the flourishing number of people that are, I hate to use the word, but I will, inculcated into the Enlightenment. And so I'm not just saying, well, let's just increase the number of Islamists. Let's increase the number of people that are...
That's kind of what I was going to ask. Again, I'm hesitant to say this because it's going to be 10,000 people are going to misconstrue it as something that it's not. But the population of the West is decreasing. It's below 2.2 now. I think in some countries it's in Japan. If you want to put Japan in there, South Korea.
No, I think South Korea's got a serious problem.
Yeah. So, isn't your argument? Doesn't it rest on the foundation of? Again, the principles of the Enlightenment are open to everyone. Anybody can use them. But most societies, in fact, the majority of societies, aren't predicated on that. They're authoritarian or they're anti-democratic, not even non-democratic, but anti-democratic. Isn't your assumption, like if we just flooded Western countries with people who are from cultures in which they don't have these values, wouldn't that derail your optimism?
Yeah, that's a terrible idea to...
Well, we're already doing it now.
That is an anti-Enlightenment impulse that exists within our culture. That itself is a soluble problem, and I would say is a blip in the history of humanity, one would hope, in the history of our civilization. It's caused by political and educational forces that have these terrible policies about cultural relativism. Let's just let everyone in, regardless of what their values are, regardless of what they think about how a society should run. So if we can get past that, There's a certain amount of optimism in the United States right now, precisely because people have decided, well, maybe it's not such a great idea to just have completely open borders. Maybe there should be some other criteria by which you allow good people into the country who can contribute. Now,
Does it give you pause to see that Western Europe does it give you pause to see that we continue, and Australia is you're a little bit protected by your oceans, but importing large numbers of anti-Enlightenment folks in that.
yes, but I think it's been a lot worse in the past. Things have been worse in the past. And the fact that despite the fact we have imported at a rate too high, too many people from cultures that are antagonistic towards our own values, nonetheless, I disagree with Douglas Murray on this. Douglas Murray talks about societies as being fragile ecosystems.
Yeah.
And I think that is true of some cultures. So, for example, any totalitarian dictatorship tends to be a fragile ecosystem because all you need to do is to get rid of the dictator and the whole place is going to fall apart. Islamism is fragile precisely because it's a static society.
Yeah,
unwilling to change.
that's why they have blasphemy laws. If it wasn't so brittle, they wouldn't need blasphemy laws.
Yeah, but the West is different. The West is not so fragile. The West is resilient. The West instantiates a whole bunch of error correction mechanisms so that even when the error is made, such as we've imported too many of the wrong people too quickly, we can correct that. And that's all that needs to happen is the political will and the will of the people to say enough. And I think we're pretty much getting there right now. There is a mood, there is a zeitgeist across the West, at least from my sense of it, that things are shifting. Not shifting fast enough, but the mere fact that there was a rejection at the polls in the most recent US election of the theory that we should have open borders, or that you guys should have open borders, was
I love how you threw we in there. You've been here for like a week and you're already American. All right, keep going.
We're all American, that's what we're talking. Now, we're not there. We're getting there in Australia. The next election, to put on my prophet's hat, I think will be a rejection of the same ideology, of the same idea that we should just welcome all people, no matter how genocidal their ideology happens to be, no matter how anti-Australian, no matter how much they want to burn the Australian flag or how much they want to suppress free speech, anything. People are rejecting that. People are rejecting the woke ideology. People are rejecting the idea of unrestricted immigration. And if I'm right, and if other people who are optimists are right, that there is this sea change happening, would you change your mind that then a larger number of people would be a better thing?
That's a great question. That is a great question. That's a great question. I'd have to think about it. I'd really have to think about it. That's a great question.
Here's one you don't have to think about. What, at the moment, given your pessimism, what is your number? What is the upper limit
It's
of
a good
people?
thing you're sitting. To be clear, I don't want to. And it's not. I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic. I would say, because I'm not pessimistic. Ultimately, I'm optimistic. I was pessimistic short term, especially when Harris was in office. You know, I just had a conversation with Mia Hughes about the trans stuff and the ideological capture of our institutions. I'm super pessimistic about universities. I'm super pessimistic about basically every legacy media, every legacy NPR. I'm CNN. So media, medicine. They're still doing this transing stuff with children. And then people say it's not happening. It's not happening. We talked about this. Oh, it's a great thing. It's happening. This is terrific. No, but I'm very pessimistic. I'm just pessimistic about what I've been talking about for years: a crisis of legitimacy in our institutions. There's a crisis of confidence. There's a Habermas, the German philosopher, called the legitimation crisis. So what would be my ideal number? Remain seated son, probably 200 million.
But how do you arrive at that number? So I'm going to throw you to what you do with street epistemology. What is your reasoning to get to that such a precise number?
Oh, it's not. The number isn't precise at all. It could go. I could go up. It's not precise at all. But I'm telling you, I think we have far too many people now. Now, I will say that if you craft the conditions as you explicated to me, that careful analysis, if we really are going to see another anti-enlightenment and it has a stickiness to it, that it stays, I think I'd be if that's the case, I think I would change my mind. I don't know if I'd move radically, but I think that if we have enlightened societies with freedom and individual autonomy, I think we could certainly handle more people.
So
I mean, look, let me give you a simple example. So one of the reasons when I was in Auckland, they had these cars, these little bikes called limes. Do you have those?
yes.
So you get on those and you just ride, and you put your phone, and it's like $1. It's nothing, and I loved it. I used to just drive around, even when I didn't have to be any place. I would just drive around. I thought it was so fun. Now, the city of Portland, Oregon, tried that, and the deranged people over there destroyed them, threw them in the lake. We just can't have nice things. We just. So if you're going to say to me, and when my son came in and visited me, he described Auckland as a city where diversity works. He also said something very interesting to me. He said he's not used to seeing English lettering on signage without homeless people. And you just didn't see many homeless people at all in Auckland. Whereas, again, from Portland, or you were just in LA. Mm-hmm. We should talk at some point about your experiences of Reed's neighborhood. But I think the Enlightenment is more tenuous than people think in terms of adhering to the values. I think it's less stable than people think it is. I think the institutions are less resilient than people think. I think it's Ronald Reagan's democracy is never more than a generation from being extinguished. I think we have to work to maintain. We need an educated populace. I don't think we have that now. We need strong institutions, and people need to be able to trust those institutions. My concern is that the future that you've just outlined, that is an insane amount of work to achieve. And we can't even stop children's genitals from being mutilated. We can't even stop, some pretty basic, we can't even, dude. So Musk wants to audit with Doge. He wants to audit the military. Bernie Sanders comes out, I'm 58. Ever since I've been a kid, the left has been talking, we need to audit the military, audit the military, audit the military. Bernie Sanders comes out and says, yeah, we want to audit the military. And all these people lose their minds at him. You traitor, So, I mean, I think, or maybe it's that I'm on social media, or maybe that I'm getting I don't know, maybe I'm living in my own kind of echo chamber, but the kinds of societies that you're talking about with that unbridled, it's not Pollyanna optimism, it's not Pollyanna, but that unbridled optimism, I don't see us creating those for a long, absent AGI, I don't see us creating those for decades.
You mentioned teleos before, but I have no teleos. All I'm saying is that so long as we have the conditions now, and we continue to foster the conditions now that allow for us to continue to improve our circumstance, the institutions that you talk about of error correction, so long as they are robust, and they're reasonably robust right now, all of the problems you just outlined as you were mentioning them, trans stuff and auditing the military and people resisting that, and there's a whole bunch of irrationalities that exist. I think irrationality to a large extent will always exist. But all of those problems, you weren't talking about people being killed in the street,
Right.
just, mass rape going on, although it does happen in some places. The worst of the worst problems are not the ones that you're animated by. It seems that what you're saying is that we have these problems, and I agree. You're always going to be able to have problems. Even in my, wildest dreams about an optimistic future with the flying cars and the, beaming yourself over to Mars or whatever it happens to be, a Star Trek-like future, there will still be problems, and there will be a Peter Pekosian in 1,000 years' time saying, "Do you know what? The population now is 100 billion, but I think it should only be, 20 billion or something like that." There will always be reasons to say there are problems now, those problems are terrible, they're being caused by people, people are the cause of problems, we should reduce the number of people, then we'll reduce the number of problems. But what I hear is reduce the number of people, reduce the number of solutions, or potential ways of arriving at solutions. And so we have to begin thinking of people, as I said, and this is stolen from the libertarians who say, 2 hands, 1 mouth. We produce, we should really say, trillions of neurons, 1 mouth, because we are constantly coming up with creative solutions to problems. And we want everyone, even in the worst places in the world, they really do want to solve their problems. They really do want to make their circumstance better. But they are mired in bad ideas and bad ideology, and they are victims as much as they are perpetrators. When we watched those nurses from Australia earlier on who were saying that they would kill Jews or Israelis if they were in the hospital, those people are evil. Those people are perpetrators of a terrible ideology, potentially, although the evidence is that they didn't actually kill anyone, but one would imagine they might very well follow through on it.
I don't know. I mean,
But they are also, and the Conservatives will hate me for this, they are also victims. They are victims of an ideology that they've been inculcated with since, I think they were brought up in Afghanistan. So they were browbeaten into that. And then they existed in a community, and shame on Australia for not assimilating them. Shame on Australia for...
I don't know. Maybe they didn't want to be assimilated. Or maybe they
But why,
actively...
that's also a problem that they've been inculcated with. They should want to. Now, why don't they? Now, you might say, well, okay, they've got free will, they can choose not to.
No, but they
also
probably because they hated secularism, I guess it would have to be. Or, I read a Kurdish economist in Sweden, I can't remember his name, who said that the number one reason that people don't assimilate, I was thinking it was going to be religiosity, but it's not. It's whether or not they're skilled, they can make money. Again, I don't know how, it's outside my area of expertise, I don't know how universalizable or generalizable that is, but I think it's unfair to place the problem on the Australians unless you want to claim the problem is letting them in the first place. It completely baffles me that you let these people in. I mean,
I agree.
If you need people to work, just let in Mexicans. They're great. No, I mean, like, for real. They're not killing Jews. They're not going to overthrow the country. They're not a fifth column. They're not, I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it.
I think that it's
but back to the number of people. But back to this.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
But I didn't mean to cut you off. But did you want to?
No, I was just saying, it's also always a failure of ours. We just don't know how to convince people to want to be secular, to want to be, part of Australian culture. It's not all on us. It's certainly on them, but we share the blame. If we were better at our job, and I'm not saying I have the answer, by the way, I'm saying there must be a possible route. This is a job for philosophers. This is a job for philosophers and psychologists and various other people to figure out, what do you do to new immigrants? What do you teach them? What values? What lessons? But anyway, let's go back to the number.
Well, I think that's the wrong question. I think the question is, why are we letting these people in? Why would you let someone in who wants to destroy the very civilization?
Well, we don't. Yeah, I'm just saying, if it's a neutral person, if a person who is otherwise, not aligned in any particular way.
Like they're Mexican or something.
Yeah.
They're probably there for economic reasons. So you've given me a lot to think about. We'll close this before we go to our next disagreement. You've given me a lot to think about. I did more thinking than rebutting, but I'm going to think. Again, you've given me a lot to think about. Can you steelman my side, or are there any problems with your position?
As I say, and this is one of the difficulties with the optimistic side I take, people always interpret it as being an inevitable slide into a utopia where it's going to be a rosy future, an unproblematic state, and that's not my position. So to steelman your position, people not only provide solutions, they provide problems. And the more people you have, the more problems you have. And I can certainly see an argument that if the West loses courage, if it runs out of steam, if the Enlightenment is not sufficiently defended politically, then absolutely. Yeah. You do not want the forces of, and I keep coming back to Islamism because it is the ideology of today that it presents the most danger to the West, along with communist China and perhaps certain woke ideologies as well. If all of those are on the ascendancy, Putin's Russia, if all of those begin to gain more and more power, then clearly population increases in each of those areas. If you increase the population of people who are aligned with Putin, if you increase the population of communist China, if you increase the population of jihadis, that is a recipe for absolute disaster. And I do not want to do that. And so we don't know how virulent some of these ideas are. But if they gain virulence, then my position is completely untenable.
All right, that's Brett Hall. Keep watching.